Welcome to the Explainer. If you think an organization's environmental footprint just sort of magically stops at its own front door, well, the updated ISO 14001-2026 standard is about to completely change your perspective. Today, we're putting on our detective hats and exploring how modern environmental management requires us to track impacts across the entire value chain. Are you responsible for your supplier's pollution? It's a pretty provocative thought, right? Under the new ISO 14001-2026 framework, the answer is increasingly yes. The stakes for supply chain environmental liabilities have literally never been higher. I mean, when a logistics provider spills chemicals or a waste contractor illegally dumps materials, the organization that hired them is on the hook. It's a massive shift in accountability.
Okay, let's dive into this and map out our journey. We'll be hitting 1. The life cycle perspective, 2. Controlling the supply chain, 3. Auditing external providers, 4. Outsourced process nonconformances, and 5. Achieving complete integration.
Section 1. The life cycle perspective. So, what are we actually talking about here? Well, this represents a massive paradigm shift. The life cycle perspective is a systems approach. It considers environmental impacts from the absolute beginning, the moment raw materials are pulled from the earth, all the way through design, production, distribution, product use, and finally disposal. ISO 14001-2026 explicitly requires this expanded horizon for operational planning and control under Clause 8.1. You simply can't just look at what happens inside your own facilities anymore. To really put this in context, compare the old way with the new way. The old way of environmental management, it was all about internal smokestacks and local discharge pipes, strictly focused on internal operations. But the new mandate, life cycle thinking, requires you to track the ripple effect of every single external procurement decision. Your environmental responsibility now travels right alongside your product, up and down the supply chain. And a product's timeline brilliantly illustrates exactly how far that responsibility stretches. Look at day 0. You have raw material extraction, like mining or agriculture. By month 3, you're in the design phase, making critical choices that will dictate whether a product can eventually be recycled. Month 6 hits, and production involves outsourced contractors. Fast forward a year, and logistics providers are distributing the product, burning fuel, creating emissions. 10 years later, that product finally reaches end-of-life disposal. A single product's environmental impact spans vast amounts of time and geography, and the organization has to consider all of it. Section 2, controlling the supply chain. So, how do organizations practically manage this sprawling, interconnected web of external activities? Well, Clause 8.1 lays out a highly actionable framework. Step 1 is to define environmental criteria, because procurement can no longer be based solely on cost and delivery. Step 2 is evaluating supplier competence. Do they actually have the training and systems in place to handle hazardous materials? Step 3 is establishing firm contractual obligations. And Step 4 is monitoring performance. These aren't just voluntary guidelines anymore, folks. They must be firmly embedded right into the purchasing decisions of the organization. So, the crucial point is how this works in practice. Let's consider a great example straight from the source material. A packaging manufacturer applies life cycle thinking by writing specific requirements for recyclable materials or reduced plastic content directly into their procurement specs. By demanding biodegradable alternatives from their suppliers upstream, they directly mitigate downstream environmental harm when the consumer eventually throws that packaging away. It's proactive pollution prevention through purchasing. Section 3. Auditing external providers. Now, in the real world, auditors operate on objective evidence. They don't just trust a supplier's word. They demand hard, documented proof. They want to see completed supplier questionnaires evaluating environmental risk. They're looking for specific contractual environmental clauses, not just generic boilerplates. They review material safety data, verify actual waste reduction practices, and critically, they check incident reporting records to ensure contractors are communicating when things actually go wrong. But where do these outsourced environmental risks actually hide? We often jump straight to manufacturing, but consider logistics and distribution, freight providers causing spills or generating massive emissions. Think about waste disposal. Contractors taking your hazardous waste and, worst case scenario, dumping it illegally. Facility maintenance features external crews washing unapproved chemicals down your storm drains. And raw material extraction brings its own heavy impact. These are the exact blind spots auditors immediately zero in on. Section 4, Outsourced Process Nonconformances. Now, what's really interesting here is the dangerous gap between corporate assumptions and actual auditor findings when uncovering major compliance failures. Organizations often just assume their suppliers comply with environmental regulations, but the auditor, they find zero verified criteria in the contracts. Organizations assume waste contractors dispose of materials legally, but the auditor finds zero tracking systems. Management assumes maintenance crews use approved chemicals, but auditors find external contractors completely bypassing internal controls because no one ever gave them an environmental induction briefing. Let's see how this builds into real-world disasters. Here are the most common rapid-fire supply chain audit failures. Logistics providers spilling chemicals because they weren't trained on your specific emergency response procedures. Contractors accidentally damaging containment structures right on your site. Waste transporters hauling your hazardous materials without valid permits, making your organization legally liable. These aren't just theoretical risks, guys. They are urgent, everyday non-conformances. Section 5. Achieving complete integration. So, how do we seamlessly fuse these supply chain controls with our overall environmental management system objectives? It all comes back to a very specific number, Clause 8.1. This clause dictates that the organization remains legally and ethically responsible for outsourced processes, regardless of where they physically happen. You absolutely cannot outsource your environmental accountability. True integration means your procurement team, your design team, and your environmental managers are all operating from the exact same playbook, ensuring every external provider aligns perfectly with your internal policies. I want to leave you with this really powerful conclusion directly from the source material. Environmental stewardship must extend across the entire value chain to ensure sustainable organizational performance. That essentially drops the mic on the ultimate goal of the ISO 14001:2026 standard. Your environmental performance is truly only as strong as the weakest link in your supply chain. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to really think about this final question. Do you actually know where your waste contractor takes your hazardous materials? Once it leaves your loading dock, do you have the objective evidence to prove it was handled safely? It's a provocative thought that forces us to confront our own procurement blind spots. Thank you so much for joining me for this deep dive into supply chain environmental controls. Keep questioning, keep verifying, and I'll see you in the next explainer.